game, and video games are shallow and serious and not serious. And we're saying we want to make a game about the conflict, and you can actually win the peace between the two sides. And we want to show both perspectives. And this was the response. And to be true to Randy's vocabulary, he actually said, he was sitting there, he was silent for a moment, and then he said, widely out of scope. And to his credit, they let us go with it. And it was a wild ride, it was a crazy ride. And not only that we made a student project, like many other projects now at the ETC, we actually took it out as a company. And we sold it in 60 countries. And one of the biggest stories about what we did with Peacemaker, and again, very early, so the distribution that games have now wasn't there, it didn't exist. So one thing we did, we went to the Peres Center. So many of you probably heard about Shimon Peres, the former president of Israel. And we made a deal with the Peres Center. They bought 100,000 copies of the game. And they took 80,000 of those copies, and they distributed them through the newspaper. So in one day, in 2008, in Haaretz, which is like the Israeli New York Times, and El-Quds, which is the equivalent in the West Bank, people open the newspaper and they got a free CD of the game. And in such a small country, you can imagine how it can become the talk of the day. And then they saved 20,000 copies, and they work with them until this day in workshops in both Israel and Palestinian schools. And in a way, the project has a life of its own. So we're not involved anymore with it, but they still get funding and they still get the game in workshops. I want to show you a quick movie, a quick clip that was actually edited and made at the ETC. And you can see a bit about the game and the media around it and how it was played in schools.
Peacemaker is a game in which you take the role of one of the leaders. You can take either the role of the Israeli Prime Minister or the Palestinian President. You can play both perspectives. And the idea is that as the leader, you have to react to real-time events happening in the world. You can negotiate with other leaders, but you also have security or military actions that you can take. And by doing so, you have to reach a peaceful solution while in office.
In an Israeli high school, a new computer game called Peacemaker was launched today. Children playing the role of Israeli and Palestinian leaders trying to make peace in a virtual world of suicide bombings and Israeli military strikes.
We don't expect to address all issues of the conflict. We don't expect to give all the answers. We're bringing up issues for discussion.
I think the best aspect of playing this game is that, especially if you're Palestinian student in the territories or an Israeli student within Israel, you get a chance to really feel what both sides are thinking and get a better sense of what they can do together to work towards peace.
If you look at the video game industry today, there are so many games out there about violence, about war, about destructions. We say a simple thing: there is certainly a place for one little game about peace.
So this is when I was very young and naive. But I want to conclude this act with this chapter with two quick stories about how the game was used outside, like the real world context. Anyone knows who this guy is? This is Dani Atom. He was the head of the Mossad, and at that time when we came with Peacemaker, he was the candidate for Prime Minister in Israel. And he made a mistake and agreed to play the game live on national TV in Israel. And can someone guess what happened when he played Peacemaker live as the Israeli Prime Minister?
He lost.
Palestine.
How long did it take him to lose?
2 minutes.
5. And it's all on camera, and it's all in front of the reporter. And the reason is that we did this inciting incident, the suicide bomb, the 3 triggers. I mean, that's the whole point of this inciting incident, to show you that the events are very violent. Can you actually take restraint? Can you do something else but bomb the other side? But that's what he did. He did an Apache strike, he sent a military unit, and very soon he got the 3rd Intifada, which is one of the losing conditions. And then the reporter is saying, "What do you think about the game?" And he said, "Completely unrealistic, because I did all the right things." So this is when we understood that probably this audience is already lost, and we need to go to the younger generation. And we did those workshops in, as I said, with the Press Center and other places. And there I understood something very important. You know, we made this game with big aspirations about creating empathy and viewing the other side's perspective. And, you know, maybe even understanding what solutions could work. At the end of the day, the most immediate impact of the game was people playing it and understanding the Middle East conflict much better than they understood by watching the news. There was a quote that we kept hearing. "I played your game for 2 hours, and I understand more about the Middle East than watching the news for you know, months or years." And this is interactive media. I mean, some of it is our design, but a lot of it is the nature of the medium. So that's the Peacemaker chapter. Where this quote is coming from? With great power comes great responsibility. Who said it in Spider-Man?
Uncle Ben.
Yeah, that's true. Any idea where this quote actually originated from? Much before Spider-Man? Facebook. Much before Facebook. Much before the internet. So I actually discovered it doing the presentation at the American Library Association. And it was Voltaire that said it, about the poverty gaps and the inequality in France. So that's actually before Hollywood hijacked it and made it into a cliche. It is actually this quote. And I'm talking about it in the context of games because this is how I feel. You know, you have this very powerful medium, arguably the most powerful right now, and just growing stronger, very strong financially. This is worldwide. Any idea where this is coming from? $1 billion in 3 days. Which product it was? GTA 5 last fall. Biggest launch of any media entertainment product in history. It took Avatar 3 months to do this. The average age, by the way, I need to update the slide every time because every year the ESA is publishing their new thing and the age is just rising. And the reason is that many of us had played games when we were young. You know, we keep playing games. And this is how we extend. And obviously new platforms as well. And the last one, this is from Jane McGonigal, famous research. So we're talking also about duration of time. People play one single game for a much longer period and much deeper engagement than they have with a movie of 2 hours or 90 minutes. And so this is the power. This is the responsibility. This is my daughter, and a few years back. But to me, this is the responsibility. And I'm looking at it less about, you know, we need to make a game that does X or Y. I'm looking at it high level and I'm saying the diet must be different, right? It can't be that 100% or 95% of the games that are very successful are all pure entertainment. And if you look at other media, and I'm sure that many of you heard the argument, but I think that if you kind of check it medium by medium, you see that this is the case with other media. Other media knows how to be financially successful, get critical acclaim, but still deal with very profound issues. So book is very clear to us. But look at graphic novels. The case of Mouse, that many of you probably know from '92 when he wins the Pulitzer Prize, this is exactly what games went through. You know, comic books were ridiculed, were basically a big epidemic, you know, in the last century. And now we're talking about a guy that wins the Pulitzer Prize, that changes, not only that he changes the medium, he even changes the name. Suddenly we call it graphic novels because it's more respectable. And we can go to Barnes and Noble and buy graphic novels about any issue, political, social, etc. Let's talk about TV, obviously. What happens also in evolution of media is that we're becoming more sophisticated and nuanced. So you can have something like MASH. By the way, before the last Super Bowls, that was the last episode of MASH, most viewed TV show in America. We're talking about a satire. We're talking about you can take a very serious context, but still, have something that is entertaining, compelling, and even funny. And I think in games we're getting there, but still very far. I mean, I'm still seeing the headlines of, oh my God, a game about the Gaza conflict. But one day it won't be a surprise anymore. Documentary is very obvious to us, but what I like more is the example of the Oscars. This is not niche. This is not comparing games for social impact to, documentaries or something that is not widely watched. We're talking about the biggest competition in the movie business. Look at the movies that win. Look at the movies that are nominees in the last years. Social, political issues add-on. And successful, critical acclaim, made by the best talent in the industry. And this is where we need to be probably too. If we want to be meaningful with games, right? The reason I'm optimistic, one is that I'm running Games for Change, and one partnership that I'm very proud of and very excited about, it's very new, it's the second year, is with the Tribeca Film Festival. So this kind of established industry is recognizing games for social impact for the first time. And we can only learn from them, because what they do and the way they build a sector, it's kind of 20, 30 years ahead of us. Another thing that they helped us to do is get to consumers. We were always with Games for Change, serious games, games for learning, talking to our own sector, talking only to professionals. With Tribeca, for the first time, they took us to the streets. So people are actually, and it's amazing to see, people are discovering those games on the streets of New York City. They're not coming to play Games for Change. They're coming to a family fair and to have fun. And they're discovering that, oh, there are other games than the ones that we are used to, the way you used to think about games. I'm going to go over it kind of quickly, but I think that this is another milestone, the idea that you can bring people from outside of games. You can bring people from the White House. You can bring Sandra Day O'Connor. And one thing that was very interesting when they came to speak to Games for Change and other conferences about games is that they got engaged in projects. So it wasn't just like a keynote and we're going home. Sandra Day O'Connor, since she announced it in 2008, got deeply engaged with a project that I'll mention later. And Morgan Spurlock, that just spoke a week ago at Games for Change, immediately spoke with us about, I want to do something with games. I want to extend my next project into a game. And this is something very exciting. The White House, Michael Levine is here with the National STEM Challenge that was announced by Obama, all triggered by the encounters of those people with the community. Another milestone, which I see as a very important one, the Game Awards, the Oscars. We talked about the Oscars of the film industry. The Oscars of the gaming industry happened, this is kind of the incarnation of the Spike TV Awards, happened in Vegas in December. And for the first time, they didn't speak with us. They just did it on their own. They put a Games for Change category. You had to see the tweets flying, like, by gamergaters and stuff. Like, what is good? I mean, they didn't even get it. They didn't understand what it's all about. But it was a series of very strong games, very high quality games. And the winner was Ubisoft with Valiant Hearts. So you have like a commercial company that made a game about World War I, winning the competition. The last thing that might be odd for you that I'm seeing as an optimistic sign, I'm looking at Gamergate. And I'm assuming that most of you, or all of you, heard about this. To me, the events are very tough and negative. But what it signifies in the evolution is exactly where we want to be. It's this tension of new voices coming, of diversity, of people that are saying the status quo is not enough anymore. And the definition of gamer must change Or you know what? Maybe we even need to get rid of the word gaming because we don't have it in the audio media. We don't have moviegoers, watchers, we don't have book readers. Everybody can do it, right? My daughter can do it, and my grandmother can do it. It will be a different movie or a different book, but they'll both have their own experiences. We're not there with games yet, but I think that we will be. And you'll have people 7 to 77 enjoying different digital games. Last act is the one about the future, and one thing that we're engaging in now, and it's a research project that tries to look at impact and classify it. For a decade, the feeling was, okay, anything goes, you know, let's just see what people can do. And many pioneering efforts, and it was like a forest, you know, with new trees coming all the time. But now we started to look at the forest, and the forest is a bit chaotic. And people are speaking different languages, and people are, you know, this one says, no, my tree is much more beautiful because I proved it. And the other one says, no, you're using the wrong methods to prove it. And, you know, my tree is much nicer, and I put it in the best position. So what we're trying to do with it is to actually start to classify with the community. It's an open conversation, and the ETC is also part of it. And we sent a draft last week. How can we make order, and how we can start to understand what types of impact games can achieve? We started with 5 categories, and this is really a draft, and it might change in the future. But we started to look at games out there, especially very successful cases. We talk about what games could even do, and not classify them by content. Not to say, okay, games for health, or games for this, or X, or Y, or topics, or subject matter. Let's see what the impact of the game is, and how we can measure it, and how we can aim for it. And another thing that we discovered is that each of those categories has not only different evaluation methods, it's almost like a different discipline altogether. Because when you measure learning, you want to work with people that are experts in education. But when you measure behavior change, many times the expertise will come from social sciences or health. We put a category of building collecting power, which is actually community organization, which is a lot about building movements and networks. I want to show you, how much time do we have, Drew?
6 minutes.
Okay. I want to show you quickly one case study for each one of those categories. And again, this is a draft. We might have 1 or 2 more categories. We might get people that will push back on one of the categories, but I think the principle is the thing that we're trying to identify here. Learning is one of the most obvious things to people that come to Games for Change and other conferences. Skills, knowledge, people speak now about soft skills or 21st century skills that are very interesting because we're just starting to understand how to measure them. Things like entrepreneurship or teamwork. This is kind of the new age of learning. I'm taking iCivics because this is a great story of someone like Sandra Day O'Connor that comes to Games for Change and announces, this is what I'm going to do after my retirement from the court. The first project I'm going to take on is a video game project. People were very skeptical, but since then, this group of iCivics made 21 games. So it's a whole portfolio. You can play as the president. You can understand in another game how the constitution works. You can understand in another game how the court system is working. And what triggered their project was the idea that there was a very famous Pew researcher said that 2/3 of Americans don't actually know how the government works. And she said, you know, I'm looking at my kids. I don't need brain research to see how they're engaged with games and how compelling they are. And what I want to do is what American Idol is doing. Because those people that didn't know how the government works or who are the judges on the Supreme Court, they did know who are the judges on American Idol or The Voice. So she wasn't this kind of discouraged. She was actually excited about using popular media to convey those messages. In terms of numbers, I just got the fresh latest numbers yesterday. 7 million students all over the country, a great rate of growth. And the interesting thing about the iCivics games, yeah, there is broccoli there, right? but at the same time, one of two students actually played at home without needing to, just because they like the games. The second one is raising awareness. Here we're talking more about communication. We're not talking about, we're not trying to get a very specific skill or knowledge across. We're talking more like a campaign, more like advertising. I'm choosing Dumb Ways to Die. How many people know Dumb Ways to Die? So it was created locally. It was created for the Melbourne subway system around safety. Look at the numbers, what a global hit it became. This is another slide that I need to refresh all the time because it was 90 million for the clip and now it's 102. They got much further than what they intended, but they also got the messages across. And the way they did it, if you look at the clip or you play the game is not about safety in trains. Maybe 10% of the game is about safety in trains. And that's the beauty. This is it starts to remind me what other people do with media, that they don't hit you on the head, that it's actually very compelling and the messages are organically introduced through the concept. Let's talk about building movements. Make Money, it wasn't a huge game, but I think it was one of the most brilliant designs that I've seen. It wasn't necessarily a digital game, there was a digital component, but the game itself was the creation of a new currency. And the idea was how two communities that are very, very isolated in Georgia can interact. One was mostly African American, one was mostly white. How can they interact, and how this interaction can help the local businesses? And what happened with Making Money is that people got half of the bond, and they needed to match it with the other half. It created new ties, and when they created those bonds, they could go to the local businesses to redeem them. So it actually boosted the local economy. And many of them came back to the same businesses that they discovered through the game. So a brilliant idea that was tied to the real world, tied to the creation of real value for the items in the game, and really about creating ties and networks and movements. Fold It, I'm sure that many of you know, right? How many of you know Fold It? Fold It is a very interesting category. We don't call it a game for learning. We're not calling it a game for awareness. The way we look at it, and I'd love to hear your ideas as well, it's a game about augmenting something that already happens in the world. That work was done by supercomputers. The supercomputers did it very fast and for years and years, but they couldn't solve a certain problem. And when it went out to thousands of players with their labor, but also with their creative forces, they could solve it. And now I think there are already 3 publications in Nature magazine where on the author line you will see Folded players because they actually solve those very, very important solutions for HIV/AIDS and cancer. Last category, the toughest, behavior change. Arguably, it's a lot to put on a game to say that it also needs to change your behavior. There are so many steps until you actually change your habits, and it's so tough to do it long term. One example is very interesting because it was the research was very rigorous, and as much as they invested in the development of the game, they invested in research around the game. And they proved, this is a game for cancer patients, young cancer patients. They proved that those young patients that played Remission and understood what they're going through better than others that didn't play the game were actually much more consistent in taking drugs. So it changed their behavior for the better in terms of actually getting treatment that could save their life just by playing this game. And that was kind of a classic comparison between a control group and people that didn't have the intervention. They also went into brain research. This is really early. I'm going to skip it. I'm also out of time. But this is very early. You remember the example of it with Peacemaker? I learned by 2 hours more than I listened to the news. What is really going on in the brain? Which areas are triggered by interactive games like this that is not triggered by listening to a story or watching a linear movie? So what I really want is Maybe someone else will come next year, but the slide will be one of your games. So I really call all of you to join the movement. Not anybody needs to create a game. Someone can fund the game, someone can advise on the game, someone can help with the research, but I really think that the timing is even better than 2004, and the trend is only going to be like this from now on. Thank you very much.